Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. It is Friday, May 1st, 2020. I am Andrew Hansen, and I'm excited to be joined again by Shane Caldwell here for day 2 of our NFL podcasts, the virtual tour of the entire NFL. We're going through one team at a time. And if you missed it yesterday, Shane had a cameo appearance from Cliff Kingsbury. He did a nice impersonation there. How are we feeling today, Shane? Are we going to get another impersonation?
I'm feeling good. It's Friday. We made it to May. I don't think I'm going to do the Sean McVay impression today. So, although Sean McVay had a pretty nice house as well, and his girlfriend's probably even better looking than Kingsbury's. But, so yeah, those guys are these young coaches are kind of on fire. But as we'll talk about today, I don't know if maybe the McVay fire was starting to simmer down a little bit last year. So we'll see if he can reignite that with his coaching genius,
Yeah, I can't blame it. You nailed the impersonation yesterday. And it would be a little bit confusing here with Sean and Shane going back and forth.
So often confused. Shane and Sean often confused. So
It's funny. I actually heard a clip where Sean McVay was, throwing a little flack towards Kingsbury for, how much he hyped up the background of his mansion there. But it is funny how Sean McVay's, the picture outside the window looked very similar, didn't it?
Yeah, they had the same exact landscaper and everything. So they had competing. They were definitely competing with who could get the best house, the best look.
So today I see the Tigers hat. You're a big Detroit guy, Detroit sports. But I'm a little bit surprised you don't have some sort of crown on, because you got the victory last night in the DFS Coach Talk NFL Simulation Challenge. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, I was kind of overdue because I haven't been doing well in the NBA lately. So I was due to get an NFL one. So this is my Tigers hat, the crown. But yeah, you got the crown of the Sim King right now with what do you have, 5 wins?
I've got 5 wins right now. It's a race to 7. With our pros and our members. It's a joint contest that we run. We do 1 or 2 per day, and it's a lot of fun. This crown really was yours just a couple weeks back. You were the champion. You were the champion of the DFS Coach Talk Challenge. Yep. So I was inspired by all of your top finishes. So I've been trying to match you.
I know. I made everyone step their game up, and I'm kind of glad the target's not on my back now, because now that you're 2 wins away from clinching, I think the target's on your back now. So now it's you versus everybody.
That's right. It is a race to 7. And it's a lot of fun. So if you haven't checked out our website, go take a look. It's DFSCoachTalk.com. You can join as a member with either a weekly, monthly, or annual membership. And those memberships will be frozen until we get baseball or basketball back up and running. And we are unique in that what we do here at DFS Coach Talk is we really use the eye test. We hand build all of our lineups. We don't use optimizers. We aren't against it, but that's just not how we approach it. And when you're a member, we provide lineups for you in every sport for DraftKings and FanDuel, and that's how we set ourselves apart. So we're going to continue to provide these free daily podcasts, and they are going to be 7 days a week, all year round. The 3 sports that we cover are the NFL, NBA, and MLB, and that's how we approach it.
Yeah, I mean, right now, if you sign up, your membership is frozen until the sports start back up. So you're going to be able to enjoy all the fun we have in the Discord and all the good information we share and the fun contests we do. And then once sports starts up, you're already going to be, a member, and you're going to be ready to go, because it's going to be crazy once sports starts back up, and we're going to be prepared, because we've been taking this time, the downtime, to prepare instead of just, waiting for sports to come back. We're attacking the information and getting ready all the time. So it's a great membership, and membership includes all sports. So because we're going to probably at some point we may be in a situation where we have NFL, NBA, and MLB going on at the same time. We'll see how the schedules shake out. So, and those are the 3 things that we specialize in, and your membership includes all those sports, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's right. September could be a crazy month if everything goes smoothly and we get all these sports back up and running. We could have the playoffs for baseball and basketball as the regular season NFL is getting kicked off, or at least the preseason even if they move it back a few weeks. So fingers crossed for that.
Yeah, it's gonna be, we're gonna go from no sports to, like sports heaven, real quick here. So there may not be fans in the crowds, but there's gonna be a ton of people watching, and a lot of people. We're gonna be building awesome lineups, so it's gonna be exciting.
Now, as I look at that Detroit Tigers hat, I might as well mention on Twitter. That reminds me of your Twitter handle. So tell folks where they can find you on Twitter, Shane.
So my Twitter handle is DET Sports Shane. So DET Sports SHANE.
Right.
So yeah, definitely hit me up on Twitter.
Excellent. And you can find me at Language Olympic. So thank you so much for following us, tuning in, and wherever you're listening, please, if you have a second, give a thumbs up, positive review on the podcast. Or if you want to watch and you're not on YouTube, we are putting these videos up on YouTube now. So come over and give a thumbs up and subscribe so that you get the notification when the video posts every day. All right, Shane. Well, yesterday we embarked on our virtual tour around the NFL. We're starting in the NFC West. Yesterday we hit the Cardinals. Today we're going to break down the LA Rams. They finished 9-7 last year. Some big changes on offense. So give me your initial thoughts on how the offense looks as we head into 2020.
Yeah, I mean, they were coming off that huge year in 2018, Super Bowl year, 13-3. Todd Gurley was on fire. Jared Goff was looking like he was proving people wrong. And Sean McVay was the prodigy, the genius, right? So then you fast forward 2019, all of a sudden their offensive line's looking a little shaky. Todd Gurley, his knees looking a little iffy. That happened really going into that playoff run in 2018. So all of a sudden now you went from basically the number one offense, most dynamic, most creative, fantasy gold, to an offense that was kind of struggling and inconsistent. So it was a huge shift there for this offense, and it was very surprising. Now, being that they have a creative offense, they still put up some good stats, but it wasn't as consistent. For some of these players, it was boom or bust, and you certainly couldn't trust guys like Todd Gurley that you used to be able to trust. Jared Goff was pretty inconsistent, and like I said, the running game wasn't there. I think everything was predicated off the running game, the play action pass, and running backs catching balls out of the backfield too, like Todd Gurley, and they didn't excel in those categories in 2019. So it really hurt their fantasy production. So that burned a lot of people. So we'll talk about some of the changes they made, and hopefully that will reignite this offense, because it was a little disappointing, even though they weren't, it's not like they were the bottom rank. They still had some good things going, but compared to where they were, that was a huge disappointment.
Yeah, and you're right. That rushing game was a real problem. They were 26th in the NFL last year. They only gained 1,809 yards on the ground at only 3.7 yards per carry. And the trickle-down effect of that is really huge, because we know how much the Rams love the play-action pass to set Goff up. And, a lot has been made over the last couple of years of how much success the Rams have in the passing game on the play-action pass. And it just wasn't as effective last year with that poor rushing attack. So Gurley is gone now. That's one of the big changes. Brandon Cooks is gone. Yeah. So two huge changes on offense. And before I forget, there is a new offensive coordinator this year for the Rams. It's Kevin O'Connell, a 34-year-old, so really right in McVay's wheelhouse in terms of the age. But he spent the last 3 years in Washington. 2 years he was the quarterback's coach. Last year he was the offensive coordinator. But we all know that the Redskins had a very tough year last year offensively, just near the bottom in all the major categories. So I'm not very confident that he's going to provide a huge boost. But as you started to allude to there earlier, it's going to be a different look without Gurley and without Cooks.
Yeah, I guess we're going to see. He may be with McVay brought him in because he's a very creative mind, and they can come out with new innovative concepts to get players open and to ignite that running game again. So it could have been that he wasn't successful because of the lack of talent they had in Washington, because they didn't really have much of a running game. They didn't have a good quarterback. So it's kind of hard to fault him there. But yeah, it's one of the things we're going to have to keep our eye on to see how creative this offense is with the new offensive coordinator. But yeah, it definitely makes you a little bit skeptical, a little bit nervous, being that, Washington was really horrible when he was the coordinator.
Yeah, let me give you some stats. They were dead last in the league in passing yardage, 28th in passing touchdowns, 22nd in rushing yards, and 26th in rushing touchdowns. So really across the board, it was just very weak. You mentioned it's not like they had the greatest collection of skill players out there, but skeptical, I think, is a great word for it. So, as we've started to do here in these breakdowns, we usually start off with the quarterback as we break down the offense. Tell me a little bit about Jared Goff.
Yeah, so Jared Goff, he was under a lot of pressure in 2019, and he was really just a lot of short passes, a lot of really quick passes. So it's a high-paced offense, which is good. A lot of quick passes. But he was very inconsistent, and he never was able to have, for fantasy, really any ceiling games. So when I'm looking at his stats here, 46, 38 yards. So he was actually pretty good for yards last year. The problem is he only had 22 touchdowns, and he also threw 16 interceptions. And when you're losing points for interceptions, you're not getting enough touchdowns. That just he was never able to have those ceiling games that he had the year before. Only 7.4 yards per attempt, which is not great. He wasn't really getting much deep ball. Decent completion percentage, 62.9, but again, just quick passes, getting it out, because he didn't trust the offensive line. He didn't have a running game like he did before, an efficient running game. And Jared Goff is not really that good under pressure. He's a good arm talent, but he's not that good in the pocket, maneuvering under pressure. So that's the problem, is he doesn't excel. He needs the right environment, the right system, and the right talent around him, and a good offensive line to be good. And they had that. 2018. And they just, I think everyone took that for granted. Like the Rams are just going to be this high powered offense every year. And, their offense was still good. I mean, the nice thing is they run a fast pace of play, like third in the league in pace of play, which is great. They still were 10th in points per game, 24.6. So considering everything was going bad, they may not be that far away from getting up into the top, 5 or 6, teams in offense again. But Jared Goff, he didn't really have any games over 30 points. So if you're looking to take down like a DFS tournament, you need those guys that are the surprise guys that are going to put up huge ceiling games, and he wasn't able to do that. He did have 8 games on DraftKings over 20 points and 6 games on FanDuel over 20 points. So he was a hit or miss cash game type guy if the salary was right. His salary wasn't really that cheap though either. So what's your opinion on Jared Goff there?
Yeah, so here's what I want to start with for my thoughts on Goff. I want to run a stat line by you, and I want you to give me a grade on it. All right. So This is a stat line from Goff. All right. 19 for 38, 229 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. So without any more context, what's your grade on that?
I think that's an F. Yeah. That's a bad game. That's what happens when Jared Goff is under pressure and he doesn't have an elite running game. That's Jared Goff. So
believe it or not, that is his stat line from the Super Bowl. In 2019, he was 50% completion percentage, only 229 yards, no touchdowns, had to pick. Obviously, the Rams couldn't even score a touchdown in that 13-3 loss against the Patriots.
Oh man, that was an ugly Super Bowl. If you like defense, I guess, but man.
Yeah, right. But it's funny how you say that he's not good under pressure, and of course you're talking about the breakdown with the offensive line, but he really didn't step up to the occasion with the pressure of the Super Bowl, and I think that had a bit of a lingering effect on him. You mentioned his turnovers. And if you look back, he's really had a downward trend in terms of his ball control. And last year, in addition to those 16 picks, he also fumbled the ball 7 times.
Yeah, so, that's right.
All in all, because he also ran for 2 scores, he had 24 touchdowns, but 23 turnovers. And that's just not going to cut it.
Yeah, no, he's really going to need some of these younger players to step up and help him out this year, they might be able to have a resurgence. But yeah, it's almost like Jeff Fisher came back to coach him last year or something. Remember how bad he was?
Oh no, please no.
My God. Yeah, that's horrible. I mean, come on, McVay. So they were still top 10 in some categories. In the passing, they were ranked with the as a team 4498, almost 4,500 yards, and that's fourth ranked for passing yards. The problem is a lot of turnovers, not that many touchdowns. So really, it was just like dinking and dunking, garbage time, but not efficient at all. So it didn't equate to fantasy production, which is really all we care about, anyways.
Yeah, and you're right. He didn't really have the ceiling game last year. The only game all season when he had 3 touchdowns was the final game of the regular season against Arizona. They were already eliminated from the playoffs. So again, when there's no pressure and you're playing a terrible defense like Arizona last year, then he has a decent game. But you really just could not count on him for any ceiling games throughout the middle of the season against the solid opponents. So
so he's a quarterback that you might look at if it's a game that no one's talking about, doesn't seem to be any pressure. Maybe he's at home and it doesn't seem to be any pressure on him, and it's just a good matchup. You might take a shot at a guy like that because he is talented still, and the offense should get a little bit better this year. But they definitely had a disappointing season.
Yes, they did. Yeah. So in terms of the offense getting better, one area where they're hoping for improvement is in the backfield, and it's a big challenge because Todd Gurley is gone. They did get a second-round draft pick with Cam Akers, so he's in the mix. And here's the question, the million-dollar question with this backfield, Shane, is in a perfect world, who do you think will be the lead running back for the Rams this season?
I've heard some people say Darrell Henderson, but I think he's inconsistent. I think he's undersized, and he's really more of a third down type, receiving back to me. Malcolm Brown, to me, is more of a plotter. He's solid and consistent. He's really more of like a goal line, change of pace type back. So not a big fan of him. So I'm really targeting Cam Akers. If Cam Akers, the rookie, if he can acclimate and learn this offense fast enough, I think rookie running backs can make a bigger impact in most positions. If you look at Cam Akers, he's 5'10", 217 pounds, so he's got a decent amount of weight to him, lower center of gravity compared to like a Todd Gurley type player. And I love it. His combine was great. I mean, at decent weight, he's running 4.47, 40 time. His workouts were great, his quickness. And really in college, like last year alone, he forced 74 missed tackles. So the guy can break tackles. He's got quickness and home run speed. And that was at Florida State, where he didn't have a good offensive line, really not that great of an offense, and he excelled. And the guy put up still 1,144 yards, five yards per carry, and 14 touchdowns last year. Then he also came up with 30 receptions, 225 yards, 4 touchdowns. So I'm looking for Cam Akers to have a big year. I don't know if it's going to be right out the gate. Sometimes it takes rookies a little bit of time to acclimate. So if he's not acclimating right away, I still prefer Malcolm Brown. I'm skeptical on Darrell Henderson. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see who they. I think it's going to be a pretty good battle on camp there.
I do too. And I think this is one of the edges that we're going to provide here at DFS Coach Talk. Is here we are in early May breaking down the backfield, and we haven't even got to any sort of OTAs preseason. But I'm with you. In the preseason, I'm going to be ready to target Cam Akers. I think he's got a lot of talent. If he can, learn the playbook quickly enough. My prediction would be that he's going to be the lead back. We see it, time and time again now in the modern NFL. These teams aren't going to spend a second-round draft pick on a running back if they don't plan on using him. And he's 20 years old, so he's young and fast. He's got an edge over these guys that have been there. They haven't really done much. They've had their chance. You mentioned some great stats for Henderson. I'm sorry, for Akers. And again, playing in what was widely regarded as playing behind what was widely regarded as a poor offensive line at Florida State just makes it all that more impressive. Apparently, he's gotten really good grades on his pass protection. So, one more edge to help Goff a little bit. So I like him as an early season play, certainly in preseason. So we'll be on top of that. And then in terms of Brown and Henderson digging in a little bit more, I agree with you. If I had to, if the Rams were gonna play tomorrow, and I had to predict a starter or who I would play, it would be Malcolm Brown. He at least got in the end zone with 5 touchdowns last year. Like everybody else on the roster, he only averaged 3.7 yards per carry. So, you're right to describe him a little bit more of a plotter. He didn't hit a bunch of home runs. But to me, he performed a little bit better than Darrell Henderson, who got about half as many carries. He was also 3.8 yards per attempt. He only caught 4 passes all season. So it's not like he's shown a lot in terms of, oh, wow, we got to have this guy in the field because he's so great catching the ball. His ceiling game last year was 8.9 on DraftKings. That was the game over in London, and Malcolm Brown didn't even play that game. So if there's anything we learned about Darrell Henderson, it's he hasn't proven it on American soil yet. He's got to go to London to have even a decent game.
Yeah, exactly. Apparently that long plane ride actually helped him out. But yeah, he's very inconsistent. The fact he didn't get that much playing time, even with the injuries they had, tells me that they didn't trust him early on. So unless he can do some kind of huge change in the offseason here for being an upgrade, I don't think the coaches trust him. That's why Cam Akers was the very first pick that they had in the draft. So that tells you what their priority were right there. And really, Cam Akers was the type of talent that could have been a first-round pick. But as you know, this NFL draft was pretty deep on running backs. It was deep in other positions, which pushed those running backs down. So it devalued that position. So Cam Akers is the type of guy that could be a first-round talent. They got in the second round with the 52nd pick. So that was their priority, and that tells you everything you need to know about how much they trust Darrell Henderson, in my opinion. If they loved Henderson, then why would they use their very first pick in the draft on Cam Akers,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're in agreement there on Akers being the target. Just not much, that jumps off the page with Brown or Henderson. I'll just mention that Brown's one ceiling game, he had 2 games over 10 fantasy points, but the ceiling game for him came in week 1 when he vultured 2 touchdowns from Gurley against Carolina.
People were pretty mad.
I think, I think that's part of the reason why I didn't really like the first week last year. I think I had some Gurley, and I didn't have Lamar Jackson like you, and as you were crushing it in week 1.
Yeah, I think they thought the Gurley's knee was going to give out right before he crossed the goal line. They didn't trust him. Or Malcolm Brown's pretty strong, younger guy. So they didn't trust Gurley. I think it's just the arthritis and the deterioration of his knee and him being a bigger guy. We'll see how he does in Atlanta. He might be able to hit a few games, but I obviously. You knew when they were in that playoff run and all of a sudden Todd Gurley wasn't getting carries, something was wrong. They weren't just like, oh, we want to change of pace. We would like to lose the Super Bowl. No, That's not how it works. Okay. Something was going on. They were very secretive about it, but they took a big cap hit and some dead money to get rid of Gurley and Brandon Cook. So that's where this team is. They're in a bad salary cap position. So they're relying on draft picks, younger guys, cheap free agents, and undrafted free agents is what this team's going to be, because they have some superstars, but they're not in a good salary cap situation.
Yeah, they're really not. Some huge contracts, and Goff's the sort of the last guy standing with the monster contract. So let's talk a little bit about Goff's weapons on the outside. This is an important receiving core in fantasy, guys that get a lot of catches, and really a little bit more clarity than in the backfield. So tell me a little bit about this receiving core.
Yeah, obviously everything starts with Cooper Kupp. He had a breakout year. A lot of people didn't think he was going to be one of the top, really wide receivers. They thought he was going to be decent, a decent kind of PPR type guy. He ends up being overall fantasy, rating number 4 wide receiver. He was kind of a boom or bust type guy, though. He had those huge monster games, but then sometimes he would trick you and you would fall into the trap of playing him, and he would only have, 6 to 8 fantasy points, like all of a sudden choke. But he had huge games of, I'm sure that you were probably on him on DK, I can imagine, right? Because of he's PPR, he had huge plays. I mean, we had top DraftKings games of 38 points, 36.2 points, 29.9, and 29.7. So he had those 4 games there. The problem is, he also had some really bad games too. out of nowhere. We were like, where did that come from? We were like, this is for sure a smash spot for Cooper Kupp, and all of a sudden he didn't do well. So overall, 94 catches, 1,161 yards, and 10 touchdowns. So even though he's not a big guy, he was their number one red zone threat. So, I mean, you got to love that. The problem is that he did it all in basically, the 4 or 5 weeks, so he was the ultimate hit or miss, boom or bust type guy. Did you experience the same thing with Cooper?
I did. And yeah, certainly he's a guy that I target on DraftKings as a PPR monster. And you mentioned really the key stat that set him apart is those 10 touchdowns compared to Robert Woods, who we'll get to. I mean, he just he's had a chemistry with Jared Goff here for a couple of years now. Goff loves to throw to him, and you can't blame him. He just does an excellent job getting open, making catches, and you got to love him in fantasy because of that high upside. He actually averaged more fantasy points last year than Goff, which says a lot about Kupp, and it says a lot about Goff. There are a few quarterbacks like that in the league with guys who are just PPR monsters like Devontae Adams averaged more than Rodgers last year because he was a monster. Hopkins was right up there with Deshaun Watson, a couple others like that. But in general, it's pretty rare. A lot of these star quarterbacks average 5 or 6 more points per week than their receivers. So
yeah, they definitely should.
Kupp is certainly much more often a target for me than Goff in GPPs on DraftKings, and that'll stay the same this year. He really, for a guy that gave you that many weeks where he was right around 30 fantasy points or higher on DraftKings. His max price last year was 7.4K. He was in that 6 to 7.5K range. So really just got you great value. And
he was a better value on DraftKings. He was one of the top rated scoring receivers on there, but he wasn't among the top for price range. Where on FanDuel, he was in the top 10 on pricing, but outside of the top 10 on scoring, right? So he wasn't as good a value on FanDuel, but DraftKings, he was a good value based on his pricing. So, and he's a little bit more, he's definitely a PPR type guy. He got a lot of targets, which was good.
And I'll also add that he did have those 4 games under 10 fantasy points, those duds, but 3 of them came right in a row in the middle of the season. So hopefully that was just a bad stretch where he was a little bit hampered. And this upcoming year, we can count on a little bit more consistency and, a more consistent floor.
Yeah, and I look at the overall offense is if Cam Akers comes in and does what I think he's going to do, that offense is going to be rolling more, and that's more opportunities for Cooper Kupp, being that he's kind of the red zone target. So just higher scoring in general, more for everyone. So I think and that's going to set up the play action better, and a lot more room to operate for Cooper Kupp.
Next on the list, we've got Robert Woods, who was very similar with his stats. He had 90 catches, over 1,100 yards, just like Cooper Kupp. But he only got in the end zone twice, and through the air, that is. He did get 17 carries for 115 yards and 1 score on the ground. We've also seen that be a theme where Sean McVay will get the ball in the hands of the receivers any way he can, including with the end arounds and ends around and the reverses. And then with Woods, sort of similar with Kupp, he had 5 games over 20 on DraftKings, 2 games over 30, but he also had some duds. He had 6 games under 10. So very similar stat line here with Woods. He just didn't have the touchdowns that Kupp had.
Yeah, it's he was kind of a workman type receiver. Good route runner. Strong. Yeah, it seems like he'd be good in the red zone. He had in past seasons. I remember it seems like I kept playing him like, hey, this is going to be the week that he gets a couple touchdowns. It's like you kept waiting. Like he's going to get touchdowns. The guy's getting targets. He's getting receptions and yards. He never got it. But a lot of that was account to, again, the overall offense wasn't as good. Not as much time for Goff to throw, and Woods wasn't excelling in those really quick passes. So, so it's just very inconsistent. You can see that Goff's bad play really affected these wide receivers, where Cooper Kupp was able to excel just because he was just absolutely on fire, but Robert Woods was solid though. But definitely up and down, inconsistent. He ended up being wide receiver 14, which is good for Robert Woods, for the price. And yes. he was a good, he was usually good, very good priced. So he was a value guy, especially earlier in the year too, I think. So.
Yeah, he was ranging from 5.4 to 7K on DraftKings. So very nice return there for a guy with that many catches, 90 catches. So how about the rest of the receiving core? Now that Cooks is gone, do you think Josh Reynolds is going to be, next man up and have the inside track to get the bulk of those extra targets?
Josh Reynolds kind of has had his opportunity the last few years, and he's had a couple good games because, Brandon Cooks has been injured. There's been injuries. Cooper Kupp was injured a little bit. So he hasn't really capitalized, and he was kind of trending downward. When the offense started sputtering, it didn't seem like he was getting as many targets. He really didn't produce last year. So I'm not as high on Josh Reynolds. He'll have to show me different, but I don't think Josh Reynolds is the guy, which again brings you back to the draft. Again, right after Cam Akers, they had another second-round pick, and they took Van Jefferson, wide receiver out of Florida. And this guy he's not an elite speed guy or elite quickness. He's just a solid wide receiver. He's got good size. And his dad is a Sean Jefferson, who played in the league. He was actually a coach, played for and coached for the Detroit Lions. Really good wide receiver coach. So him having his dad as a wide receiver coach, the guy's way ahead of the game in terms of what to expect at the pro level. And he had 6 touchdowns the last 2 seasons at Florida. And Florida's not necessarily known for having an elite, quarterback or passing offense either. So I like Van Jefferson, 6'2", 197 pounds. In 12 games, he had 49 catches, 657 yards last year, 6 touchdowns. So I do like his ability in this offense to hopefully get into the 3 wide receiver sets.
Interesting. Yeah, I support that approach. I think Josh Reynolds, I think he's got decent skill, but you're right. He hasn't really exploded at any time. He only had 1 game last year over 10 fantasy points. It's just pretty consistent where he just gets you, 1 or 2 catches per game.
Yeah.
So he only scored the 1 touchdown against Cincinnati. Only 21 catches on the season. So I agree. I think Van Jefferson has a chance to become that 3rd wide receiver, and you can see the maturity in his routes with his dad having that background. Oh, yeah. I like the way he sets up the slant pattern and gets separation, which he needs without the lightning speed. But interesting.
He looked really good at the Senior Bowl, going up against matchups, one-on-one matchups. He looked really good there. So, and you could see his skill definitely with the route running. So,
and the interesting thing for Jefferson is this really is sort of the trade piece for Cooks. When they sent Cooks to Houston along with a 4th rounder in the 2022 draft, they got the 2nd round pick back from Houston and used it on Van Jefferson. Now, you might think, well, does that mean that he's going to replace Cooks' role in the offense and be that deep threat? I don't think he's going to be the deep threat that Cooks was. Last year, he only had 5 receptions where the depth of target was over 20 yards downfield.
Yeah.
Another concern for me is that he only had 3 broken tackles all of last year. So he's not, a rugged guy. He doesn't have the deep threat potential that Cooks did. But I agree. He could be, another really reliable guy on those shorter passes. And we've talked about it. Goff, he kind of needs to get the ball out quick to be successful.
Yeah. And I think Van Jefferson showed good route running, good body control, and, good attacking the ball in the red zone. So that's where he had those 6 touchdowns the last few years with not really that much volume in that passing game. He showed that he can be a red zone threat. Yeah, and like you said, he's not going to be this elite deep threat, but they don't really have a guy on this on this team besides Cooper Kupp can hit the deep ball or run after catch, but there's not going to be that type of offense. They're not going to be the home run type offense. They're going to be more picking you apart. And again, it goes back to they're going to be relying on that running game if they can actually get it going. If Cam Akers can be the spark plug they need,
Absolutely. Well, the tight end group is also interesting to me. Tyler Higbee really finished the season strong last year. What are you expecting out of him in 2020?
Yeah, I think, again, Gerald Everett, I think, was hurt for a few games, and Tyler Higbee just went off. And again, quick passes. Goff is looking for those big targets. He doesn't have that many big, taller targets at wide receiver, right? So he's looking for those quick passes over the middle, hit the seam. They can run tight end screens. With that offense being creative, they can really get the tight ends open and run a lot of innovative routes there. And Tyler Higbee showed he's actually showed good athleticism and great hands and awareness there. Yeah, having coming kind of out of nowhere for a tight end. What do you have? 734 receiving yards, 69 catches, 3 touchdowns. So yeah, really solid there. So they might use Gerald Everett more as a blocker because he's a little more physical, bigger guy, and use more Tyler Higbee. So I think his outlook is actually looking pretty good.
Yeah, he really took advantage of that opportunity down the stretch when Everett was injured for 3 of those games. As I mentioned, five straight games to end the season with 20 fantasy points on DraftKings. 2 of those were against Arizona. We talked yesterday about attacking Arizona with tight ends, and he certainly fell into that category last year. But they did sign him to a 4-year deal last fall for $31 million. So they've invested in him. I think he's going to continue to get a lot of targets. This is Everett's in the last year of his rookie deal. So we'll see what happens with him. But the Rams went out and drafted another tight end, which surprised some because, Higbee and Everett are solid guys with multiple years of experience. But they drafted Hopkins out of Purdue.
Yeah, and Hopkins actually ended up being 2019 All-AP All-American. Huge production at Purdue, 61 catches last year, 830 yards, 7 touchdowns. So you can actually put him, he's 6'4", 245, so he's a little undersized, but he ran a 4.66 at the 40 at the combine. So he's got pretty good speed for a guy that size, and you can put him in that slot tight end role. Again, with this being a creative offense, and now the wide receiver depth is a little questionable. We'll see how it is with Van Jefferson. They can put him in the slot and line him up and create mismatches there, depending on who they're going up against. So that's a guy that I think that could be a rotational player. I don't see him coming in as a rookie. It's pretty hard for a tight end with the multiple responsibilities. I don't see him coming in and making a big contribution right away, but it's another one of those players that you'll want to monitor depending on injury situations and how he develops. Because I think that he had some weaknesses, some issues with dropping the ball in college. He wasn't necessarily elite, even though he was an All-American. But yeah, he put up good stats, good production, and they might be able to find a role for him, but I don't think it's going to happen quick. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he's going to get on the field for blocking. I think he is more of that, hybrid tight end, slot receiver type. And I think what you mentioned with his speed, that's going to be what'll give him the edge and get him a chance to be on the field. I mean, if you just got one more guy with surprising speed, maybe get a mismatch, I think he'll have an opportunity, certainly if either of those other guys goes down. But he may be another guy to target in the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a really good athlete for his size, and he has a knack for making big plays. So put up the production. So he's just one of those guys, doesn't impress in one area, but really, if you look at the film and look at his production, it's really good. So so I think he has potential. I think they drafted him for a specific role in that offense. I don't think it was by accident. And let's see, what round did they draft him in? Yeah, I mean, it was actually 4th round.
Fourth round, yep.
Yeah, so I mean, it was, that was a pretty early pick for them because they didn't start picking to the second round, you know. So,
right.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, that covers the offensive look. Let's start to break down the defense. I mentioned the new offensive coordinator, And the Rams also have a new defensive coordinator this year. It's Brandon Staley, a 37-year-old. He's been the outside linebackers coach for the Bears and Broncos during the last 3 years. So he's the newest addition to the staff. What are your thoughts on the defense?
Yeah, I mean, Wade Phillips is a pretty tough guy to follow there. He's a great defensive coordinator, but having like a younger coordinator come in could be good. They did lose on defense there. They lost Eric Weddle, who obviously was a veteran safety for the defensive backfield there. And that he was kind of definitely a leader with his experience. So they lost him. They lost Clay Matthews, who's actually, even though he's kind of older, pretty good at rushing the passer. So you obviously this defense starts and ends with Aaron Donald, probably one of the best players, defensive tackles of all time, probably the best defensive player in the whole league. So it starts with him, and they have Jalen Ramsey, who's one of the best corners in the league. So this is the first time they'll have a full year with Jalen Ramsey in the trade. They gave up a lot to get him. So he's definitely a shutdown corner. So I do like the prospect there. The problem is, beyond that, they have a lot of youth and inexperience, and I don't know how much leadership they have now for like their secondary and their linebacker group. They did bring in a couple guys, Leonard Floyd as an edge rusher. So they brought in a couple guys. They brought in Ashawn Robinson, who's played for Detroit, who's a big D tackle, so they can rotate him in there with Brockers and Aaron Donald. So I do like the D tackles, but this defense did struggle a little bit against the run. They gave up over 1,800 rushing yards. They were ranked 19th last year, so people were attacking them in the rushing game. Their pass defense was actually decent, giving up only 36-25 yards toward 12th in the league. So I kind of feel like they might take a little step back there in the pass defense, and the rush defense probably will be in middle of the pack. So they're kind of a middle of the pack defense. They were ranked 13th in yards given up, 17th in points given up. So kind of a middle of the pack, but I think there might have some inconsistencies with this youth movement that they have with a little bit lack of experience now.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jalen Ramsey coming over last year in the middle of the season, and he certainly had a huge impact. Before he arrived, the Rams were 16th in yards per pass play given up. And after his arrival down the stretch, they were 6th. In weeks 7 through 17. So he made a major impact. And, you mentioned the youth movement, and the Rams certainly tried to address some defensive needs through the draft, starting with edge rusher Terrell Lewis out of Alabama.
Yeah, Terrell Lewis is, he's an athletic freak and a physical guy, and he didn't play as much till later in his career at Alabama because it was just a stacked defense, and he had some injury issues. But when he was playing, in terms of his ability to rush the passer and how physical and fast he was, got great length and size. He's actually really good. So they got him in the 3rd round. So I think he's going to be competing for that starting outside linebacker spot, the edge spot opposite of Leonard Floyd. So I think that they did have a good draft to help fill some of those needs, and that will help there. And then they got some safeties. They got Terrell Burgess out of Utah, who's one of the top-rated safeties, and that Utah defense was awesome. So that was a good pick as well.
Yeah, you're right. They got Burgess and then Fuller from Ohio State, and Lewis. You're right. He dealt with injuries in 17 and 18, and once he was healthy last year, he got 6.5 sacks, 11.5 tackles for loss. And here's my theory. With the new defensive coordinator being Brandon Staley, who's been coaching outside linebackers, Shane, yeah. I think Sean McVay threw him a little bone and said, here, you like your outside linebackers, we're going to draft Terrell Lewis here, our first defensive player off the board, just to make you happy.
Oh, absolutely. No, they need playmakers in that defense because you can't rely on Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey to do everything. I'm sorry, you can't. Those guys are awesome, but you need 11 guys. So yeah, so they are well, if he develops, yeah, that could make a big difference for this defense. I think they are what they are. I think they're a middle of the pack defense, and it really depends if this team can make a push. NFC West is a tough division. San Francisco is still by far the best team in that division. and Seattle's not going anywhere with Russell Wilson and those guys. Arizona's probably getting better. So this is a tough division, and I think that they're really relying. I just have to keep going back. They're really relying on that run game. Can their offensive line play better this year? The offensive line was disappointing, and because the offensive line was ranked by Pro Football Focus overall, ranked like 31st in the league. So they really weren't that good. So I think that's going to be a big for this team. Can they get the running game going? Can Cam Akers be dynamic for them? And be that, even if he just had a decent percentage of what Todd Gurley's production was when Todd Gurley was in his prime in this offense, this is a perfect offense set up for running back. So that's my opinion on it.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the other teams in the division, San Francisco and Seattle. We'll be previewing those teams this weekend. Shane, you'll be on with Mike tomorrow to break down the Seahawks.
Yeah.
I do want to mention as we wrap up here that you can find us anywhere podcasts are found. Please give us a thumbs up. Feel free to send us feedback. Our leader, Joe Sarvati, affectionately known as Coach, always likes us to mention his favorite charity set up by Kobe Bryant's widow. It is mambaon3.org. So go take a look at that. Shane, any final thoughts here as we kick off May and continue our roll through the NFC West?
Oh yeah, I'm excited to see what the LA Rams can do. Still remains to be seen if they're going to be playing in that new stadium right away, because I've heard rumors there was construction delays. I don't know what the latest construction is going on there, but we'll see if they're going to play in that new stadium, and that's exciting for the city of LA. And this team has a chance to improve, but they're going to need a lot of things to go right to be able to get back up on the top in the NFC West and be a contender again. So it is very interesting. I wouldn't be shocked if they improve this season, but I can't see them making big enough differences to improve that much. So it's going to be interesting to watch them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be a real challenge to try to compete with San Fran and Seattle. So as I mentioned, be sure to tune in again tomorrow as Shane and Mike will break down the Seattle Seahawks. And on behalf of Shane Caldwell, I am Andrew Hansen. Thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to tune in again tomorrow for the next episode of DFS Coach Talk.